Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cindy McDonald's interviews. I have the distinct privilege and honor of interviewing subject matter experts from all over the world, talking about things that are important to you, your students, your families, and those you work with. And today I have with me Jenna Hartsell. She is the Education Manager for the British Council of Education. Welcome, Jenna.
Hi, thank you, Cindy. Thanks for having me on.
Now, did I say that right? Is that the British Council?
Yes, we're the British Council, and I work for the British Council's USA office based in Washington, D.C.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to work for the British Council in Washington, D.C.
Sure. So I'm actually originally from California, where I know you're based, and I'm a UCLA alum, so proud Bruin, go Bruins. But I became interested in international education through my own study abroad experiences at UCLA. I studied abroad in England and also in southern Spain. And then I went back and taught abroad for a year in Sevilla, in southern Spain. And out of that, I just became more and more interested in the intersection of internationalization and education. And so I pursued a master's in international education at the George Washington University, with the idea of maybe working in a study abroad office at a university, since I enjoyed my experience so much. And there I learned about the British Council, which is the UK's organization for cultural and education relations with other countries. And their mission is to build connections and trust and understanding between people of the UK and people in other countries. And I thought that sounded like such interesting work. And on the education side, the team that I work on supports UK universities in their work in other countries. So we have offices in over 100 different countries around the world. And I specifically work with UK universities, helping them with recruitment efforts, with study abroad partnerships. I've worked a little bit with them on alumni efforts in the US, very much guided by what they're interested in doing. And then also on the flip side, supporting people, students and counselors and parents and anyone in the US who is interested in pursuing a degree in the UK, helping to provide them with information. So it's a very fulfilling role for me, since I'm able to help other people have international education experiences, which were so formative for me. And I've been in the role for about 5 years now.
That is so wonderful. And it does make a huge difference. I can speak from personal experience and appreciate your efforts in helping to facilitate and coordinate our recent journey to the UK to visit universities. Yeah. So it really is a pivotal role and can make a big difference. So what have you found? When people ask you, why should I go to the UK for an education? And keep in mind, our students are from all over the world. You know, they might be coming from the US, but they might be coming from, Asia or other places too. So when people ask, what's the benefit of a UK education? What do you tell them?
Yeah, so there's a couple of top reasons that I share with students why they might want to consider the UK for their education. I think a primary reason for students around the world is that the UK's higher education sector is highly regulated by the government. So students can be assured that they're receiving a top quality educational experience. And UK degrees are well known and well respected around the world. I think the UK style of teaching and their degrees can be another draw for students. I think the UK is a best fit for a student who, at the undergraduate level I'm speaking to specifically, knows what they want to study, because they'll launch right into their subject of choice. They won't take general education requirements, for example. So they can really specialize in what they're interested in. So I know for some students that might not be the best choice if they want to have a little bit more of that flexibility. But if they do, if say they're really into science and they never want to have to write another English paper, or they love English literature and they never want to have to take another math test, and then the UK is a fantastic option for them. I also think for students who are interested in having a shorter time to getting their degree, their undergraduate degree, in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, their undergraduate degree will only be typically 3 years. If they choose to study in Scotland, they will have a 4-year undergraduate degree. Although the benefit of that is the Scottish system does allow for a little bit more flexibility. So if you think of Scotland sort of in between having gen ed requirements and also specializing, they're a little bit in between those two. So that gives students another option. And I think for students from around the world who are interested in a global education experience, the UK has one of the highest percentages of international students that make up their undergraduate student body. At many universities, international students can make up to 30% of the undergraduate student body. And so students will be exposed to people from all around the world, and that high percentage of international people is also mirrored in the faculty at UK universities. So students are guaranteed to come away from their educational experience with a global perspective. And I think the last thing I'll point on is I know affordability is really important to students around the globe, and the UK can be an affordable choice for students. I think just comparing it to the US, for example, if students are thinking of studying at a private institution or perhaps going out of state, then the UK could be more affordable for them. So I think that can also be a misconception that the UK is very expensive, but depending on what a student is pursuing in their home country, the UK could actually be a more affordable option.
That is definitely true. That's one thing that was very evident as we toured around England recently, that the cost of going to a UK school could actually be less, especially for US. You know, when you're looking at $85,000 for Harvard, and the student can apply to Cambridge or Oxford or, you know, the University of Liverpool. You know, it's just such a option that oftentimes people don't consider. So,
yeah.
What are some, you mentioned that sometimes people do have misconceptions or they're myths about studying the UK. What are some of those common myths that you run into, and how can we as counselors dispel those for students?
Yeah, so I'd say I'll just speak to some of the most common myths that come up in my conversations with counselors or students or parents is that the question around affordability, I would say, is one of the top misconceptions. And so looking at undergraduate UK degrees, the tuition can really range, but you know, it can start around like 14,000 US dollars for tuition. And then depending on where a student lives, you know, outside of London, for example, students will have lower living costs, but I do encourage students not to, you know, to really investigate that and see if studying in the UK could actually be a more affordable option for them. And to keep in mind, particularly for US students, that they can use their federal financial aid at most UK institutions. So I think that's something that, you know, most Americans, before I started working at the British Council, I didn't realize that was true. So that can open a lot of doors for US students in particular. Another misconception that I hear a lot is I think it is maybe the Cambridge-Oxford halo effect, is that only students who are super competitive and have straight A's can study in the UK, when in fact the UK has over 160 different higher education institutions, and they're, you know, just like in, you know, a lot of countries, there's a best fit university for any student who's interested in studying in the UK. And, you know, I think maybe this isn't exactly a myth or misconception, but I think most students might automatically think of London, which is natural when they think of the UK. But as counselors and our role at the British Council, we try to encourage students to think outside of London as well, and that there's many wonderful universities across the country that could actually be a better fit for that student. So those are some top top myths and misconceptions. I guess I would say the last thing that I get asked about is if applying to the UK is very difficult, if students might just not be familiar with how to apply to the UK. And in fact, the UK has a process or an organization called UCAS, which is the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service. They're sort of like the UK's Common App, although they've been around longer than the Common App, but it's a very, once counselors and students become familiar with the system and familiar with the vocabulary, it's a very streamlined process. Students can manage their applications completely online and can apply up to 5 different courses through UCAS. So I would encourage people not to be discouraged by the thought of applying through a new system, that it actually is quite easy to apply to universities in the UK.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the UCAS? How is it different? I agree. I mean, the UCAS, most students are familiar with a common application system, whether it's the Common App itself or, the coalition, or like here in California, we have the UC. So what is the UCAS? What does applying to college in the UK look like?
Yeah, so I'd say one of the biggest differences from my point of view is that through UCAS, students are limited to applying to up to 5 different courses. And I guess I should even explain that a little bit further, that in the UK, what we would call a major here in the US or in different countries, they call a course in the UK. And instead of applying to a university in general, students applying to the UK will apply to a particular course at a university. So essentially they have to apply to a particular major or course at up to 5 different universities. So I would say that that is a major difference when I know students in other countries, like in the US, can be applying, up to 10 or 15 different universities
20.
or colleges, 20. So I think that can be a little bit of a shock to students and parents at first, but we really encourage them to, I think it can be really beneficial to the student at the end, that they really have to do that research piece up front, looking at the different courses at different universities and which ones they would really be interested in applying to. So I'd say that the course limitation is one of the top differences. Another difference is that the applications are very, as I should say, looking at like the academic requirements of students. So I know in the US, for example, there's a very holistic admission approach, and universities might be looking at students' extracurriculars or volunteer experience, work experience, or things outside of the academic experience, where in the UK, the universities really are interested in learning, is the student academically prepared and able to enter this course of study. So there is a heavy reliance on the grades and test scores, and the personal statement, which is included in UCAS, is, we really encourage students to think about it differently than a personal statement they might write for US university, where I don't know if I can go on a little bit of a tangent, but we always give an example in our presentations of one of my old colleagues who applied to liberal arts colleges in the US. She, in her personal statement, she would compare herself to Chip, the teacup character from Beauty and the Beast, just to, draw a metaphor that she was inquisitive and curious, and that worked really well for her liberal arts university applications. But if she were to use that same personal statement for a UK institution, I don't think they would know what to do with it. So it really should just be very straightforward why the student wants to study that particular subject, and then demonstrating their interest essentially and their experience with that subject. So those are a couple of major differences.
So a lot more academic in terms
Yeah.
of both the requirements and the personal statement.
Yeah.
As counselors and advisors, we celebrate that there's only, they
Yeah.
only can do 5
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
helps the students to really focus in on why
Mhm.
they're applying and, what where the fit is. So,
Yeah.
so that is, but that does help the students to be able to, requires them to be able to think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
So references. So I know they're called
Mm-hmm.
referees on the UCAS. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So a student within their UCAS application, they will be asked to provide a reference. And essentially what the student will do is provide, I think it's just like the name and the email of their referee, and the referee will receive a link to fill out a reference letter. And what we typically advise if a student can do this is, a lot of times it might be the student's counselor at their school who actually fills out the reference letter, but the counselor will be in touch with a few of the student's teachers, particularly those teachers related to the subject which they're applying for.
Mm-hmm.
So they can include the teacher's commentary on the student's sort of performance in the classroom and their academic interests and pursuits. We do encourage counselors to include a link to the school profile, since, around the world, and particularly in the US, just high school curriculums can vary so much from school to school that it helps the universities just to get a little bit of context. And then just like in the US, the reference letter in UCAS is a place where counselors can explain any extenuating circumstances about, anything that a student might be going through that would impact their academic performance. But yeah, it's really meant just to complement the student's personal statement and sort of back up the reasons why the student is interested in studying that subject, and that they're prepared to do that.
Great,
Yeah.
great. So how would you describe a successful international student?
Mm.
Having been there yourself and working with international students, what characteristics should we be looking for as counselors for a student who can be successful as an international student?
Yeah, I thought, that's a really good question, and something I've reflected on. And I think in talking with universities, and then also with my own experience, I think, I guess I would just encourage international students to not be afraid to ask for help. That the academic environment and just their overall environment will be different. And I think, in just thinking of the UK particularly, universities have a vast amount of student support services, but they might not be as proactive about reaching out to the student as some universities might be, say, in the US. So I think some students are just afraid to speak up and ask for help when that help is actually available and there, and there for the students. I think also advice which I received when studying abroad, which I've heard other international students echo, is that it's very tempting when you're studying in another country to take advantage of that jumping off point, just to travel every weekend and stick with your sort of US cohort, but then you're never actually really home at your home institution or putting down roots there. So I think any way that international students can get involved, say that's in like clubs or societies or sports, or they can get, connected with the people they're living with, their flatmates, as they would call it in the UK, or roommates, then I think that just can really enrich the experience for the student, and they can come away just with a network and community that they've built from their time abroad. And I guess one last thing just that we see for international students, particularly going to the UK, is I know it's a lot to ask a student when they're starting their degree, what do you want to do after university? It's a very daunting question, but I would encourage international students particularly to start thinking about if they would want to remain in the country where they're studying after their studies, or if they're planning on returning home right away, because, you know, depending on the country, there can be, you know, different processes they'll have to follow to stay in the country, and it's best for them to start those processes early. So I know, for example, in the UK, they are introducing a new graduate visa route where undergraduate students will be able to stay up to 2 years after their degree to work. But I know it's, you know, it's best for them to alert their career services office early that that's what they want to do, so they can be working on that. And just to avoid any disappointment for international students, if they do want to stay in the country after for a little bit to work.
I think that's really great advice, and definitely, you know, we as counselors often, it's just like being a parent. You know, we tell our students certain things, and it's like, oh, it's just my counselor. But when they hear it from you, like, go and ask this, you know, college, you know, be your own advocate. There's a lot of power in that. So, and we were very impressed with the level of support that students were being given and available. And one of the other things too, Jenna, that I was very impressed with is even at the large universities, how small the class sizes were. You know, there aren't the huge lectures that we often have at, because especially in general education, because they're not doing general ed, you don't have 1,000 people in a class. So talk about that a little bit, and just the way, how is instruction different in the UK?
That's that definitely is a hallmark, or something that coming from the UC system, I was surprised to see how small the class sizes are. And also that, you know, like you mentioned, since students aren't taking general education, they apply to a specific course. Students never have to worry about not getting a class that they need for that semester or that year. It's a much less stressful process. The degrees can sometimes be a little bit more prescribed in terms of their requirements, since, you know, at least in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, they only have 3 years to complete their degree. Students will still have optional classes that they can take, have a choice of different classes to take. Sorry, I'm blanking on the word.
So they have electives within their course.
Electives, thank you. Yes, blanking on that. That's the quarantine brain starting to kick in. But yeah, so they still have electives they can take. But yeah, that students don't have to worry about not getting a course that they need to graduate. The graduation rates are extremely high in the UK, typically over 90% at most universities. So I think that can give students a lot of peace of mind. And in terms of the teaching style, it is definitely different, at least speaking from coming from the US, that students are highly encouraged and taught how to become independent thinkers. There is a lot less continuous assessment, so their grades might be based on only 1 or 2 large assignments, or an assessment or exam at the end of the class, which can be very intimidating and scary for students at first. But again, this is where we'd really encourage them to reach out. Students at UK universities are each assigned a personal tutor when they begin at the university, and that tutor will stay with them throughout their entire course. And it's typically an academic who works within the department of their major or their course. So they're really there to help support the student in their learning. If they're struggling at all, students should reach out. But it's something to keep in mind for sure. For students coming from different countries. There's a lot of independent learning, which is really great if a student is considering going on to further education, like a master's or even a PhD, that they'll really have developed those independent study and research skills, which will support them in their future studies.
That's very true. And that's, as we spoke with students as we did our tour through the UK, that theme was very evident. And being able to get straight into the degree, we spoke with an engineering student, and he was from Canada studying in the UK. And he's like, I am doing things in engineering that my my peers in Canada or the US haven't even thought about doing yet. So he felt like he was getting a much better education and was getting right to it, and then he'd be able to do a fourth year. So he'd have a master's degree at the end of 4 years, and his friends and peers would still be working on their bachelors and then have to go on. So he was very appreciative of the teaching approach and the focus that he was able to get at the university. And they had state-of-the-art facilities. So, a brand new science and engineering building that offered all sorts of tools and equipment that a lot of people didn't even have access to until graduate school. So, and he had it as a first semester freshman. So,
that's great to hear.
So is there any other tips or topics that we as counselors or advisors should be considering as we work with our students? When a student walks in my office and says, Cindy, I want to go study in London, is there anything else I should ask them or tell them?
Well, I guess, just a couple of things came to mind. I think, again, just really sort of honing in on those students who know what they want to study. Although I think it's a great benefit, like you were just talking about the engineering student, that students can specialize right away. I would definitely, caution students who come into your office and are saying, well, I might want to major in biology, but also music, but maybe English lit. It can be sometimes impossible or very difficult for students to transfer between degrees once they're at university in the UK. So we just always cautious, counselors when they're advising students that students who really know what they want to study are best fit students for the UK in general. Like I said, Scotland is a little bit more flexible. And there are some dual degrees, which would be like our double majors available, but in general, I think students who have a good idea of what they want to study are best fit. And I think just in terms of for counselors or even for students and parents too, I really encourage them to, once they start to narrow down their list of universities, to reach out to the international office at those universities and try to get connected with the university's international rep for the US or for North America or whichever country a student is coming from. They'll have reps for every region of the world, because those reps, 100% of their job is to help guide students and parents and counselors in applying. And at least having worked very closely with those reps over the past 5 years, they're incredible resources of information. I know sometimes it can be tricky to find the exact contact who you need. And, I'll just put it out there. I'm happy to be a resource of if any counselors in your class, need to be connected with the international office at a UK university, I'm happy to connect them. But I really encourage that, and also to utilize, like national agencies like us, the British Council. I can help to answer general questions or put people in touch with people at UCAS if it's a technical UCAS question, or again with the university if I don't know the answer. And I guess one last thing I realized I didn't really touch on, this is kind of going back more to the UCAS question and how it's different. So on UCAS counselors will be asked to enter predicted grades in the reference section. And I know that's different than a lot of other admission systems. And, the guidance that we've heard from universities is that it's really just a best guess based on a student's past performance and thinking about how a student would be, perform on their best day. So it's supposed to be an optimistic but also realistic prediction. But that's another case where I do encourage if counselors are able to connect with someone in the international office at the university where the student is applying, they can help to give a lot of guidance around that too. And I mean, we'll see how the current COVID-19 situation impacts on admissions. I have a feeling, there will be a lot of changes, but for now, I would say that that's just another difference that I know can sometimes throw counselors for a loop. But just that, yeah, I would encourage connecting with the international office about that if you have any doubts about entering predicted grades.
That's a very good suggestion, and I'll probably have a longer conversation with a college representative. We had that conversation when we were visiting, so I think that's a great concern to counselors, advisors. So I'm glad you brought it up. So, how you mentioned the importance of being able to stay in touch. How can people reach you if they have a question?
Yeah, so my email, I'm happy to take any questions or people reaching out by email. So my email is my first name and last name, so it's Jenna, Jenna Hartsell, Hartsell at britishcouncil.org. And yeah, if people do want to call me, I'm also available on my mobile as well at 408-348-7427. So yeah, either through email or my mobile number. I'm really here to be a resource as well. So.
That's great. Jenna, thank you so much for your time. This has been very helpful, and your tips and personal experience and advice are very sound and will be very valuable to the students and families and the counselors. So thank you very much.
Well, yeah, thank you, Cindy, again.